Hello and welcome everybody to the webinar working with UNDP, UN Women and UNV, organized by cinfo here in Switzerland. Welcome to wherever you are. A warm welcome also to our speakers from the three organizations: Georg Peter from UNDP in New York, Maria de la Luna from UN Women also in New York, and Sandra Legray, UNV in Bonn. Welcome to all. We have a human resource specialist, team leader recruiting and staffing, and recruitment associate. Together, we bring about 50 years of experience in the United Nations, mostly in human resource development and management. And I think this is an excellent opportunity for all the mid to senior professionals here from Switzerland to get information and get in touch with the UN and maybe make a career step towards the UN. I'm Natal Donaloya. I work here at cinfo as an outreach and recruitment specialist. I have been working with the UN for the last 10 years before I moved here, also among others with UNV in Sri Lanka and at Bonn headquarters. So just quickly, the agenda. We will be starting with UNDP, then go on with UN Women. Third, UNV will have the floor, and in the end we'll give also some information on cinfo services for Swiss nationals. There will always be a question and answer session in between. Shortly the presentations and shortly the question and answers, and there will be another question and answer opportunity for all at the very end. Just a little bit of housekeeping to get started. We're sure you have a lot of questions, and we have received also the questions that some of you sent up front. We have them here. If you have questions that are popping up during the presentations, please use the chat box. It's the right upper corner where you have the square where it says chat. Click there and send the question to cinfo questions. We will pick them up. Nora, who is sitting here right next to me, my colleague, she will go through these questions and show them. We will read them out to our presenters, and we will try to go through as many questions as possible, but there will be some questions that are left over, and we will follow up on those afterwards, after the webinar. Please, just also the housekeeping, keep yourself muted, because if you unmute yourself, there will be a lot of noise, which is quite disturbing, and we don't appreciate that. But that goes without saying. Okay, so just a little bit of information why the cinfo organized this webinar. cinfo since 2003 has a mandate to actually popularize the mandate of certain organizations, which are UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, UNV, and UN Women among Swiss nationals, because we want to increase the number of Swiss staff working in these organizations. At the moment, we have only 8 at UNDP and 2 at UN Women, so there's a lot of space for increase, and we are mandated to help achieve this goal of the Swiss Confederation. Also, as a heads up, this is general information on UN staff positions and other positions. There are a number of UN ways to work with the United Nations. The first and foremost is the professional or general service staff, so that's career positions within the UN. We will mainly be talking about the professional positions in the next hour. But there are also other, like consultancies or individual contractor positions, or the United Nations volunteers position, where UNV is the leader on, and we'll hear a lot about that as well. We'll not be talking about internship position, because this is a seminar for mid to senior level people. There will be other opportunities to discuss those possibilities. Just up front, all vacancies of the United Nations are advertised, so it's a transparent process, but there is not one platform for all the UN. Most of the organizations have their separate platforms. Funny enough, actually, UN Women and UNDP, who are here, and also the professional position at UNV, are all on the same platform, so for that one we are lucky. Okay, I don't see the presentation anymore, but that will come back, I guess. Okay, there we are again. And most or almost all of the positions are open to all nationalities. So normally there are no quotas. People who apply are selected based on their skills and their competencies. Naturally, the UN is trying to get a gender balance. That's one point, and also people from the developing countries, if they have the same skill sets and qualifications, they are preferred. But that's when everything is equal. We have JPO positions, which are the junior professional officer positions, which are only for certain nationals. Also, Switzerland finances some of these possibilities, but these are also junior positions at the P2 level. We'll come to those, and we'll not discuss this in further detail also here. So what we're talking about especially is UN staff member positions and UN volunteer positions. Just about professional positions, there is a series of those. It goes from P1, P2 level with a minimal work experience that is required before applying of 2 years. P3, P4 positions, you see it increases 5 to 7 years experience, and then professional P5 level is 10 years of relevant working experience. This is really, if you don't have this experience, you will fall through the roster when people apply and they do not have the relevant amount, then they will not go to the selection process, to the further selection process. This is after a master's study. If you have a bachelor's level, you will have to add 2 years to each of these amounts. So if you apply for a P4, for example, it's 7 years. With a master's, if you have a bachelor, it would be 9 years, and so on. Also, D1 and D2 require a lot of work experience, about 10 years. When we come to Assistant Secretary General, Under Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, and Secretary General, these are political appointments. So the Secretary General is appointed by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and Deputy Secretary General and others are also appointed by the Secretary General in collaboration with the General Assembly. So those are not just simply about qualifications, it's also about political involvement and balancing at the worldwide level. Salaries are transparent, and this what you just saw popping up there, the light bulb, it gives you actually access to the salary calculator for whatever duty station, whatever level. You just insert all the information and it will pop up how much you would earn if you had this position. I hand now over for a first introduction to Georg Peter at UNDP in New York. Thank you very, very much for being with you, and we're very much looking forward to understanding more about UNDP, what you're looking for, how you select, and how we could get in touch with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natal, and welcome everyone, and hello from UNDP in New York. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today and to tell you a little more about working with and working for UNDP and working for world development. And I hope to make this information as relevant as possible and as close as possible and not too technical. And then by all means do send your questions in once I've spoken for a few minutes. And the first point I want to touch upon is something that Natal already raised, and I want to give you an idea of what offices at UNDP look like. Because we are a big organization, we have a workforce of over 20,000 people. There are a lot of different types of contractual modalities, and as Natal said, we will focus on staff members and consultants or individual contracts. And as I tell you a little more about the profiles that we look for at UNDP, keep those types of modalities in mind, as our workforce is somewhat divided up quite equally with a little more than 7,000 staff members and a little more than that in terms of the consultants and individual and service contracts. So that's just a bit of an overview there. And in our country offices, where we are in over 170 countries, you'll find a lot of those types of setups, and that's where a lot of the opportunities are for you to enter. Let's say at the P3 or P4 level as a staff member, or as a consultant or an individual contractor in those country offices. That's where a lot of those opportunities are. And as I'll talk a little more about the platforms, the online recruitment platforms, that's where you'll find these vacancies in abundance, because we always have about 200 to 300 vacancies advertised at any given point in time. So that's just that brief overview for you. And now as I want to go down into a little more in terms of the profiles that we have, and especially the profiles that are in demand at UNDP, it's a general overview of the types of roles that you'll find, and those we typically cluster into something called program and policy, so you might also call that slightly more technical work. Then our operations work, which has such a broad range, and I think sometimes people forget that the types of jobs at the UN can be of all natures, like ourselves, human resources specialists or managers, but that goes even further to the communications arena, to the finance backgrounds, or IT as well. And then there's the coordination role, and that's where perhaps UNDP is quite unique, as we take on a coordinating role for many other agencies, especially in the field. To give you a better idea of what that means, here are some examples of profiles, and you already see the lists are long, and I'm not going to go through details of all of them, but it gives you an idea of what kind of roles you could find for yourselves as, say, staff members or as individual contracts. And they can range from very permanent opportunities in countries where they need support in rule of law or governance, where that's often an ongoing issue and can be support that we offer over years and years, or it can be short-term elements such as in some of the communications areas, or perhaps partnerships and advocacy where some quick surges of resource mobilization might be needed. And that's that broad range where you really can look at your own skill set and your own experiences and find many different avenues, because as we are one of the leading development agencies, we thus also come with a broad range of profiles that could meet your interests and meet all the types of skills that you bring to an organization like ours. And in terms of some of the key ones that I'd like to also highlight, and especially in terms of emerging skills and not only profiles, is perhaps the second to last one in general profiles, where it says project management. That's a skill and a type of role that you will see more and more across the board, not only perhaps in UNDP, but in many of our organizations, as a lot of the work that we do is very project-based, and those project management skills are very important for the types of roles that we look at, because they combine some of the technical experience, but also the managerial expectations that we have. And that leads me to the overview that I'd like to share from you. When you look at our vacancy announcements, something to keep in mind and something that you need to highlight in your applications are your competencies, your skills and abilities. And at UNDP, we look at 5 core competencies that we're keenly interested in. And especially when you look at staff member positions, you'll find that every one of those positions lists leadership, communication, delivery, innovation, and people management as a skill that is required and that you need to demonstrate. So when you prepare your applications, make sure to show where you shine in those areas and where you have demonstrated those skills before, especially as mid-level or senior level professionals. You'll have an abundance of experience, but make sure that that becomes apparent in those areas, and be clear to highlight those in both your cover letters and your CVs, or as we're known to have our personnel forms, the P11s here at UNDP. And one element that becomes similar to project management in the types of profiles, one area that becomes more and more important is innovation as well. We need to find new and useful ways of doing things, especially, and you'll be fully aware, and that's something there where I want to be realistic, we're in a downsized financial environment, and money is becoming less and less, or perhaps donors are becoming less willing to provide money, especially in a bulk way. They are more targeted in their ways, and that's where we have to be efficient, effective, and innovative in the work that we do. And if you can demonstrate those skills as well, that then sets you apart from the competition, because keep in mind, when you apply for a job, there's a lot of other people from all over the globe applying as well. And that then also leads me into the next section where we look at the profiles or the online platforms that you want to create, where we have two, and that's where we get a little complicated. And I do send my apologies on behalf of the organization of making you have two platforms, but we're moving towards some more effective and efficient ways there. But as you create your applications, a key thing, and Natal also already mentioned it, is to meet the minimum requirements, because otherwise you've created your profile in, for instance, our eRecruit platform, which allows you to save and reuse your applications. You can upload documents and keep those there and apply to multiple jobs. But if you don't meet the minimum requirements, then what's going to happen is the computer will screen you out. So a human resource specialist or a human resource associate might never actually see your application if you don't meet those requirements. And that's the full part of, as Natal mentioned, the education requirements, the experience requirements, perhaps also language requirements. Make sure to pay attention to those. And the competencies that I mentioned, they then need to come through in the descriptions that you offer about your responsibilities, about your achievements, and about anything else that you put into your cover letter, because that then makes you stand out. In terms of the second platform, that's more for some of the consultants. So if you look at some of the consultants and opportunities, you'll find that platform is a little less user-friendly, unfortunately, but it still means you can use the same documents as your CV and cover letter that you upload there. You just have to do it every time you apply for a position, and you can't reuse the same profile that you've already created, unfortunately. But that's just something to keep in mind. A little trick to tell what's what on our long list of vacancies: anything with an asterisk, with a little star behind it, that's in the eRecruit platform, and anything that doesn't is in our online job application tool. That's just a simple overview of that. And on that note, I want to focus on something that's very important to us, is our assessment methods. And that's perhaps also something that you're most interested in, is what happens when you get past all these online tools and past perhaps the first initial process. What do we do with your application, and what might we make you do afterwards to get to that next step? And I'm not going to focus on the interviews or the references that much. I'll take you through that bit between perhaps longlisting and shortlisting, or longlisting and interviews, and that's what we call desk reviews, written tests, and work samples. And their desk reviews are essentially almost a longlisting element, where we look only at your paper-based, or in that sense, digital application, and we don't, in a sense, speak to you. We just look at the documentation that you've prepared. And that's also a reason why I emphasize that you need to make sure to demonstrate all that in that written form as well, because in case the hiring manager has decided to conduct a desk review, they will thoroughly look through everything that you've presented in your CV, resume, or P11 and your cover letter to demonstrate the skills that are required and desired for that job. And if you don't do that, then you might not make it quite far in that. So it's very important to thoroughly review your job descriptions and then create your application that speaks to all those demands. And that's where your hard work perhaps comes in, because your generic job application most likely won't get you far, be it in the long listing or something like the desk reviews. In the next steps, if we then want to get to know more about you and get to know more perhaps about your technical skills, we'll use written tests, so technical tests, or perhaps even work samples. And those can be work samples that we ask for you immediately, or that we then create scenarios for you. In those, it becomes very technical, and it'll be specific to the role, where you'll get either essay questions, multiple choice questions, or even managerial scenarios where we give you a situation and you might then have to decide on how to proceed with something. For work samples, it's more along the lines of, for instance, let's take the example of a graphic designer. If you're a graphic designer, then we might already ask for some of the samples that you've already produced, some of the work that you've already done, similar to some written work or elements where you can provide a portfolio of your work. So those are the three insights there, and you'll find that most of our recruitment processes, they involve more than just an interview, because we want to get to know as much about you as possible. And here that's important, that from the get-go you always demonstrate your competencies, your skills, as well as your interests and passions. Because last but not least, what's truly important is the full motivation to make a difference for development. And that brings me to the end of hopefully I haven't spent too much time, and give you plenty of time to ask some questions as well. And so let me hand back over to Natal.
Vielen Dank, vielen herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much, Georg, for the very clear presentation. I actually also learned myself something I didn't know about the asterisk, so that is okay. I have a couple of questions for you, but please, all the listeners, don't hesitate sending your questions via the cinfo question chat. I start with the first question for you, Georg. What is, and those who are not yet muted, please mute yourself. What is UNDP looking for in terms of field experience?
That's a great question. And I'll give you two examples there, perhaps. So for the operational side, it's more about your expertise, perhaps, because I'll give you my personal example. Now I have a little field experience, but when I joined, I had zero field experience. I had lived in Germany and the UK, and then moved to New York to become a human resources analyst and now specialist for UNDP. So my field experience was extremely limited. That's one example. But in order to understand the complexity and diversity of an international organization, and in particular when it comes to programmatic and policy-driven work, or as well the coordination work, it is often priceless to have field experience. And I know that can be difficult when entering at a mid or senior level, or especially when trying to change careers. But ultimately what that means is then perhaps you also have to demonstrate your transferable skills to a good extent. And that's where all that hard work into your application documents comes in as well. Field experience is sometimes, some hiring managers, and I'll be frank, some hiring managers, they see it as a requirement. They'll might even put it in when you see that list of things where relevant experience in, let's say, in democratic governance or in rule of law, when they call that relevant experience, they might interpret that relevant part as field experience, and that they might not budge from that when they assess for that in your CV. Others might say, okay, you have that more on a technical level, more on a theoretical level, and they see potential in you applying that on a practical level in a country office. But that's then that balance of, if you don't have the field experience, then you need to make sure why you still can demonstrate that you have the knowledge and the expertise in it.
Thank you very much. I just follow up on these questions with experience. Another question is actually, do UN agencies positively evaluate previous professional experience with NGOs at community level?
I would say we positively evaluate any experience. I wouldn't want to say that we negatively evaluate any experience. There's never a negative experience. I'm not going to get too technical in some of the weighting, but for instance, internships are often weighted at 50% if they happen during studies or such, but that gets very detailed here. Most certainly when you then come to the level where you're demonstrating examples of your experience, be it in your cover letter, in your CV, or at an interview stage, or in a written test, or through your work examples, that's where you can then really shine as well. Because then you're showing the relevance of your experience, you're showing that you've perhaps even already done very similar work that UNDP does or another UN agency does, or you're showing that the work that you've done actually is in line with what UNDP has done, and that makes it easier for us as recruiters or hiring managers to actually put that into the sense of what we're looking for. The question, I really like that question as well, because it brings me to that thought of sometimes when you prepare your work, be it your application documents or for your interview, for a moment, step aside and put yourself into the recruiters or the hiring, especially the hiring manager's shoes. and see what did they try to create in the job description, and what are they looking for, and how can you make that best understood for them. So if you've got that community-based NGO experience, how are you going to make sure that that comes across in a way that they can relate it to perhaps a larger level at UNDP?
Thank you very much for this one. I have a third and last question which just came in, and it says that I find it very difficult to provide offers as a consultant as I do not know the going rates. Are there any standard rates for the different levels? And I would actually combine it with the question that came in before that said how to be rostered for short-term consultancy assignments.
Once again, great questions, and I really appreciate questions on consultancies because they are becoming more and more important. And as we move forward, you'll see probably more and more consultancy opportunities across the UN system. And so in terms of standard rates, there aren't necessarily standard rates because at UNDP, for instance, and that's because I've become very familiar with our HR processes, but not necessarily with our procurement processes and procurement processes across the agencies. But here at UNDP, consultancy is regarded as a procurement process. So even though it's advertised on our recruitment tool, which is an HR tool, it is then dealt with procurement processes. But the one thing I can tell you about standard rates, whilst there are some measures, and I'll be quite simple, Google it, I obviously can't give you standard rates because as a procurement process, it is still a best value for money procedure. So if I were to give you standard rates, then I would be hurting our procurement process of finding the best value for money. In terms of the second part of the short-term consultancy rosters, we advertise for rosters most of the time. And then, so whenever you see an advertisement for a consultancy, it will indicate a roster. So usually it's called a vetted roster, which tells you that it'll be a process where you'll then be on a long-term roster. And this can be short-term or also longer-term consultancies. And then we have another thing called the express roster. And that's a very particular roster because it addresses our emergency and crisis response work. And that's something where you go onto our website under crisis response, and it is a standard thing to say, go visit our website. But for the express roster, I'm going to have to send you there because that's where you can find out a lot more about our crisis response work and how to join the express roster, which is usually open for enrollment on a relatively ongoing basis and has various calls for nominations as well.
Thank you very much again, Georg, and we will be in touch anyway, so also for looking up on the website, if there's any questions, we will be in touch. Excellent, thanks a lot. And without further ado, I think I hand over to our colleague at UN Women, Maria de la Luna.
Sorry, can you hear me now, Natal?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Georg, for the presentation. And thank you all for giving UN Women the opportunity to be part of this presentation today, this webinar. And I hope that this will give you a chance to know more about the organization and perhaps give additional insights as to how we do recruitment in UN Women. Just a little bit before I start, one thing to add is that as you've probably seen in my bio, I've been 4 years in my role as the lead of the recruitment team here at UN Women, but I've also worked in various organizations. I've had the privilege to work for UNFPA, UNDP, and now at UN Women. I actually started as an intern at UNOPS way back when, so all in all 15 years, so I'll be happy to share any experience, my experience or any questions you may have with these various organizations as well. But one thing that I would add, and moving on to what I'm sharing with you, I'm going to build on what Georg has just shared, because primarily the process across the system, by and large, is quite similar. it follows, and I would say even in UN Women across various contracts, it's you submit your application for a staff or non-staff contract. There's normally an assessment of some sort. We screen the candidates, and we do due diligence in terms of reference checks, and we validate. We ask you for relevant documents, and then there's some sort of clearance processes for all types of contracts, and then all different approval levels for various contract types prior to informing the selecting candidate. So what I will be sharing, what I hope to share is some examples of how we do for various vacancies here at UN Women. So what, as Georg had said, prior to, even before we get to the formal interview phase, the panel interview, there's some clearance or screening processes that take place before. He referred to the long list and short list, and there are some, and I list here some of the most common reasons for candidates not to be considered for such a long list, which is basically what HR does or the system does, and we present to the hiring manager to say those who have met the minimum requirements. So it means that the candidate has not met the minimum requirements as stated in the job description. The education background is not relevant. The candidate or the applicant may have had years and years of experience, but it's not relevant to the role that is being posted. And more often than not, given that we're working for UN Women, most of our roles, especially those in the normative area, would require at times for the applicant to have some experience working on gender issues. It may require extensive experience, like number of years of experience, or it may require some experience. Perhaps to illustrate this further, I've actually, I would like to share, for instance, a sample of what a P3 research specialist would require. So you can see that the education, I mean, it's quite broad in terms of, the scope, but for now, we do require advanced university degree for most of our professional positions. And then in terms of experience, you will see that at least, for instance, in this role, there's 5 years of relevant work experience and substantive issues of gender equality involving research, and a few more points after. So when we screen candidates, the candidates who get onto the long list will be someone who meets all of these points. And then there could be a language, depending on the region, of course, and whatnot, where it would be. Hold on. Okay. Another example that I have is for a P4 policy specialist, and as Nathal had pointed out earlier, it's normally for 7 years or more. So in our case, we normally, especially for such roles, in the specialist roles, we do count 7 years of relevant experience. So in this case, you see, someone may have been a manager or director for so long, but it may not have been 7 years dealing with advocacy for women's rights, so it's very specific. So you can just imagine, like normally receive about 150 or 200 or even more for certain positions. So we try to bring down those lists to those who meet these requirements. And even then, if there are even perhaps 25 who meet this sort of requirements, we discuss with the hiring manager how it's even brought down. So if I can just maybe piggyback on what the question that was asked on field experience. For instance, in this particular example, although here it's field experience could be one of the shortlisting criteria, that could be one of, if we're dealing with all things being equal and everyone meets the minimum requirements. So those that are considered assets, so someone with UN experience or someone experienced in the region or someone with field experience could be a shortlisting criteria to finally decide on who will progress to the next stage. I think Georg spoke about what should be in the application. So maybe this is just to reiterate that. And I guess one point I would just like to add is that we would advise that the applicant or the candidate tailors the application to the job that they're applying for. I think given that indeed there's no harmonized system across the UN agency, it's a little bit, not to the candidate's advantage when we screen applications and we see letters addressed to UNDP or UNICEF, but they're applying for UN Women roles. So of course, it would be good to pay attention to these small details. And in terms of achievements, it's always good to highlight indicators or specific points. For instance, a role in resource mobilization, we glean through the whole application without really knowing how much has that person raised in terms of resource mobilization. So that's just one of those, it's often tempting to copy and paste your job description of what you're doing currently, but then it's not clear as to what one has done in the current role or in past roles, and those are often the CVs that catch our attention when it's more specific in terms of what the person has contributed in the current role or the past role. Again, I guess I did touch on this already, and maybe one thing to point out, it would be good to maybe see how it appears, because then we do take it for granted, but just to see how the recruiter will be viewing your application, because indeed this is the first impression that the recruiter or the hiring manager will see of with regard to your candidacy. So moving on to how we do assessments in UN Women in particular. Indeed, for most, especially since we have a lot of technical positions, and for mid-level career and senior level positions, we do have several assessments that we conduct for the various positions. So in general, when we do a written assessment, whether it's for a fixed term, we sometimes do it for consultancy positions as well. The criteria would normally, we will be looking at someone's strategic, if that person has strategic thinking, and substantive knowledge, if it's very analytical and clear and articulate when they voice out their ideas. And of course, we are also quick to disqualify those that do not refer to any references or any documents that they've used when they've done the written assessments. Unfortunately, we've had to disqualify candidates who have done that. But so even if you kind of quote something from our website or from your own website, it would be good to kind of quote that this was taken from UN Women's annual report or whatnot. Two other points in terms of assessments that we do at UN Women. It could be the case that we do when we have quite a number of candidates for a certain role. It is possible that we conduct pre-interviews, which is part of the screening process, which is basically often myself or my colleagues in the recruitment team trying to get additional information from candidates, so with the hiring manager. So it's not necessarily a formal interview panel, but we do screening interviews just to get more idea. And then from there, we finalize a shortlist with the hiring manager. And then one other call that we may have with the candidates is particularly for those at the P5 level and up, we actually do pre-calls with them to brief candidates about the process, the interview process, like what is a competency-based interview, and to give them more information about the role or UN Women. It actually, for us, it gives a level playing field for all the candidates, for both those coming from within the UN system and outside the UN system. So, because as we know, maybe not everyone may be familiar with, has not attended this webinar, and may not have been familiar with how recruitments are done in the UN system in general. Going even a bit further in terms of samples, here are some sample technical questions that we may have for a given role. When the written assessment is also there to gauge someone's writing skills, because, you know, for like a policy specialist, in our policy division, they write a lot of SG reports, Secretary General reports. So writing is indeed a critical skill to have for most of their roles. So, you know, when they ask to draft a memo or they do an op-ed, this is often what it's one of the common questions that we have. And then, of course, for a more senior level position, it may be to develop a strategy addressing a gender equality or women's economic empowerment issue. It could be within the context of a country or region, depending on where the vacancy is located. The candidate may be asked to draft a presentation. And of course, for operations or budget finance-related positions, there would be some financial or budget-related questions. I just noted when Georg was making presentation earlier, yes, we do ask for work samples as well, especially in the area of communications, as he has also mentioned for UNDP. And then just quickly on the types of profiles we are hiring. Yeah, we hire in several areas. On the management front, we have the heads of our offices. We are in over 90 countries now. Not all of them have a country rep, but we do have at least an international professional in most of them. And then we do have specialists in our UN Women's priority areas, both in headquarters and in the field. And then we also have positions in relation to operations. One thing to point out is that for staff positions, international positions, and general service, which is not a concern, but then for international positions and HQ locally recruited staff, that's centralized here in HR at headquarters. Everything else, your consultants and interns, UNVs, are delegated to the field offices, meaning the regional office or country office. Right now we are operating from the UNDP job site system, but we're also piloting our own e-recruit system. So quite soon we may have a similar star indicator for those positions that are also advertised in our own website. But anyways, for now, you will see most of our vacancies at the UNDP job site as well as the UN Women employment site. I think that's all I have for today, Nata, and I'm happy to address it.
Thank you very much, Maria. Muchísimas gracias. Also for all the examples that you have given, I think that gives you an insight about how the work in your daily life at UN Women looks at the different cases that go through your hands. I have a couple of questions also received for you. One relates to the possibilities of PhD candidates or academia. I read it out. Do very motivated people from academia with research background and teaching experience have any possibility to be hired? by the UN, let's say, with UN Women. What do you think about that?
Yes, indeed. In fact, yes, we do have some of our senior managers who come from the academia. In fact, our director for policy division came from the London School of Economics. So again, it should relate more to what is relevant to the role, right? So I mean, she had a lot of extensive experience in human rights and all that. So we look at the overall experience, not necessarily where one is coming from.
Thank you very much. And second question that I would ask you is about, I just read it out. My fear is that from the field, I could see that people who enter the UN mostly have a recommendation from a person into the organization. So it is really possible to enter the UN agencies through official application process, or in the end of process, recommendations are always more relevant, at least. So network is part of the application process. What do you think about that?
Good question. Well, I am a testimony to having applied for an internship online, so it does work. And you know, I think it varies. Like I said, you know, we often, at least for UN Women, the average number of applications for P3 for P2 positions, I mean, which again, it may not be the concern for this audience, it's about 600. For P3, P4, we receive about 200 or more. So how does, you know, how do you make your CV stand out? Does it help to know people around? I mean, if your work is relevant, I mean, we not only in the UN system, but let's say in peace and security, it's an extensive network, and so is the Human Rights Network. You know, if you're active, let's say in national committees, I mean, this is also recognized. So we have, I think, especially at UN Women, we are quite diverse in terms of where we have sourced our candidates from. We have candidates who have come from civil society. We have candidates who have come from various NGOs, both at the local and international level. So I think that we are not necessarily particular about, you know, where one comes from. I don't know if that addresses the question, Natal.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think I just wanted to add actually whether the having been within the UN before was crucial, but I think you just answered that question in one go. Thank you very much for this, and I think with that we'll have time for other questions at the very end. But for the moment, I hand over on UNV to Sandra Legray. Hi, Sandra.
Hello, Natal, and thank you very much for the invite. And also thank you to all participants for listening to us at these late hours. I am coming from UNV and I'm a recruitment associate, and I just want to give you a little flavor on where and how UNV is participating within the UN system. My colleagues Georg and Maria already gave you a little flavor on how the UNVs are actually recruited within their agencies. But UNV is administrated by UNDP, and we are basically focal point for volunteerism within the UN system. Our mandate is to mobilize volunteers for peace and development, advocate for volunteerism, and integrate volunteerism into the plans of UN partners, governments, civil societies, and private sectors. UNV works with many agencies. Some of them are here today, but we also work with UNICEF, with UNHCR. We work with most of the peacekeeping missions, and we are represented in 122 countries around the world. Our assignments are in the field offices, so they're not in the headquarters. And we do cover some, or we provide some entitlements for our serving volunteers. We provide the living allowance and some other benefits which are also received by other staff. And they work along with other staff in those UN agencies. So how to obtain a UNV assignment or how to become UNV? I am having a difficulties to switch the slides. I'm sorry for the waiting. Okay, thank you very much.
Don't worry, we'll take it from here.
Yes,
That's
I think
okay.
you have a control on your side. So how to obtain UNV assignment? You have to be at least 25 years old to be even able to register. Minimum university degree or higher technical diploma, at least 2 years of experience, and preferably speaking English plus another UN language like French, Spanish, or Arabic. You also need to have an ability to adjust in multicultural environment. Of course, like our UNDP and UN Women colleagues, we are professionals, we are dedicated, we are client-orientated, and we hold all values of UN. I'll speak a little bit more about the registration process because I think you are interested in how to actually become a UN volunteer. We have our database, and unlike UNDP and UN Women, we do not advertise all our assignments. So you will need to register on our website. You can register either to volunteer on site, or you can register to volunteer online. If you're interested to register on-site, meaning going as an international UN volunteer, you will need to pay attention to your profile and how to register. The reason why I'm saying that is that we are not, as I said, advertising, but we have 12 recruiters in UNV Bonn who are basically matching your application towards available assignments. So it's really important that you, as Georg said, present your skills, your competencies and achievements, because this is what the recruiters will look for. They will look for certain keywords, and they will try to actually match what you've done in the past to what is required for the future assignment. So that's one really key element. Another key element which I would like to stress is make sure that you update your profile. So once you register, try to at least log in every month. If you don't receive any proposal emails from us, still log in, and if something changes in your career or your private life in terms of changing your numbers, your email address, as well if you gain any additional experience, please enter those, because this is also very important. As I said, we do not advertise our assignments, but we match you, and we will be contacting you once we find the match for you. And if we can't find you, then it's a lost opportunity. So when we receive the assignment from our partners, we will look at our big database, which is currently bigger than 100,000 applications, and we will try to search by our categories, professional categories, which we ask you to apply for, and also certain keywords. Again, I can't stress enough, and Georg already talked about the skills and achievements. Please make sure that your work experience is really, really expressing those, because this is going to be key to find you. So our recruiters here, when they receive the assignment from the host agency, will go into the database, look based on the keywords, and long list at least 10 to 15 candidates for each assignment. They will send you what we call proposal email, which contains description of assignments, exact location, and all the details on the condition of service for you to confirm your interest and availability. If you confirm your interest and availability, they will then contact you again to further, inquire if there's, especially if you're first time applying or propose for the assignment, they will contact you again to clarify if there is any question or clarification needed about the assignment. So after the second contact or contact via telephone or Skype, we will then shortlist your candidature and propose your candidature to host partner, host agency. From then onwards, host agency together with our field units will obtain interviews. Georg already mentioned competency-based interviewing, and I think most of the UN agencies are doing it. So again, make sure that you prepare for the interview, that you are clear on what are the expectations. I would also advise you to look on Google it about the country, about the agency, because it's important to be aware of the condition, security situation. Lots of people are very excited and they confirm they're interested and available, that they would like to go through the process. But then when it comes to interview and selection, they decline because they were not sure and they are not confident of going into such a situation. So make sure you do pre-work before you actually confirm your availability. Lots of people is involved in this in the process, and then for some assignments which are quite urgent and in the emergency setting, there is lots of waiting actually for you to arrive. So it's really important. After the selection, as I said, the host agency will send us requests for recruitment, and then UNV, here we have a colleagues, program associates, will then proceed with further recruitment formalities. And then you have about 2 to 3 weeks to prepare, to actually accept, to do the medical, and we organize the travel visa and all the necessary details, and off you go to your assignment. Just in terms of the process, how long it takes, up to selection process, it takes some 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it takes longer, but recruiters here will contact you, and you're free to contact your focal point and inquire about what is happening with the assignment. Can I have next slide, please? Just briefly, where we involved and what are the current profiles in demand. We are involved in the legal and legal-related assignments. Some of them are protection, RSD, and legal officers with many agencies, protection and RSD mainly with UNHCR, health from nurses to medical doctors, with especially many of them with the peacekeeping missions, political affairs officers to public information and reporting, administration and finance from procurement to admin assistance, development programs with UNDP projects and programs experience, and in some technical areas, camp management with UNHCR, peacekeeping, vehicle mechanics, logistics, and so on with others. So all of these profiles are required by different agencies, but most of them, they require some specific, and it depends on the country of assignment. Language is another element which is quite important. We are currently looking for many bilingual French, English speakers to go to Central Africa, to peacekeeping mission in MINUSCA, We are looking for legal officers. We are looking for public information officers, camp managers, water and sanitation. We're looking for many profiles, medical doctor profiles for Mali. UNMISS in Sudan, which is peacekeeping mission in Sudan, is looking for medical profession from nurses to doctors and information technology background. With UNHCR, we're looking for protection and R&D officer currently in South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago. With UNDP, reporting and monitoring officer in Congo. With WFP, head of sub-office in Congo. So all of them more or less have to be fluent in both languages, meaning that you can write and read and work in those two languages. Apart from these assignments, which are very current, we do have what we call special calls for volunteers, and we do advertise. And on my screen, you can see a little box down under these balls. We do advertise some special hard-to-find assignments. I don't know, currently we have about few, but this is only in case we really can't source the profile from our database. Usually, most of the volunteers are recruited from our database. We do also source our candidates through different outreach mission and recruitment drives. We're visiting lots of universities, and we will have also an opportunity to go on 3rd of November to Geneva and to do cinfo career event. So we're looking forward to your visit there. Can I have a next slide, please? Thank you. Career perspective. Although UNV as an organization is not really career, building organization, we of course count on people who would like to serve and help people in need. Some benefits to me, I think, are huge. Just to understand different cultures and really becoming a global citizen, it's a great opportunity. But also to gain valuable UN experience. It's really something which will prepare you for, especially if it's your first assignment within the UN, it will prepare you for situation and future within the UN. You will learn insights, how the system works, how the agency works. I mean, if you are selected for UNHCR assignment, you are definitely going to gain that experience to be able to apply for other positions within the UNHCR. UN volunteering is not forever, so we limit actually our assignments to 4 years. And I think 4 years is quite enough time to gain that experience and to be able to further take your career with other UN agencies. Can I have the next slide, please? I talked a lot about, how you can join UNV, and I just want to mention you my journey, because I started with the UN as a national staff in my country during the circumstances, which was war. And I didn't know anything about UN or UNV. That led me actually to serve as a volunteer in Timor-Leste for more than two and a half years. I served with a peacekeeping mission, which was an eye-opener, but huge and the most rememberable experience I have in my life, working experience I have in my life. Then I moved on to work with UNDP as a project officer, also working with recruitment of volunteers for 200 development posts for the government of Timor-Leste, which again was something very unique because this is the first time in the history where a UNV program was involved in building the government. And we even have had our volunteers as advisors to a minister, and that's I am, and I think most of the volunteers who've been there are very proud of. And after that, this journey led me to become UNV and UNDP staff, and here I am. So I really encourage you to follow us on our social media channels to learn more about us and to apply. And thank you again.
Unfortunately, I speak no Croatian, but I thank you very much for your intervention, Sandra. Also for the personal insight that you gave about your career development, including your passage as a UNV. Just one thing for the housekeeping, for those who are taking notes, we will be actually sharing all the slides with you and all the recordings. It will come to you together also with a survey, just for the housekeeping. So you can stop writing. Sorry for that, for not mentioning that before. A couple of questions following up. We have a couple of minutes left. I will keep my talking to a minimum afterwards, so we can give you more questions. Sandra, the first question that came in is, what makes people stand out for UNV profiles?
Again, you know, I touched briefly upon that. I think it's important, you know, that we find you, and to be able to, you know, for us to find you, you need to really, really put your skills and experience and achievement in work experience. Otherwise, as I said, you have to also choose the right categories. I mean, if you have a legal background, you will not choose health category. So this is also very important. And choose the categories where you think you have the most experience, because there are many. There are 20 categories, and you know, there is a brief description because our taxonomy is hybrid. We have something which is called, you know, quite clear categories, professional categories, but then there are those which are hybrid. Like, for example, all the program officer and development posts are more or less found in that box where the hybrid categories. Also, you know, like refugee protection, RSD, we have one category which is protection. So make sure that your experience fit into the right category as well, because this is also one way of how we're going to look for you.
Actually, this question came not in, but out of my thinking, I want to ask you just a little bit provocatively, but why should a grown professional apply for a UNV position? Aren't those junior professionals at UNV?
We have many junior professionals, but also lots of senior professionals. I think that's something which we need to personally decide what we want to do at what time in our life. In my case, I wanted to volunteer and you know, contribute to the world, just to learn and to gain that valuable experience within the UN system. And I think UNV is a great opportunity. And I will, you know, always cherish and remember that. And it helped me quite a lot to grow within the UN system. I mean, there is a time in life when you can't do that. You can't go and just pack up your packs and volunteer for 2 years. But I would encourage everybody who are able to do it to try, because it's something which you don't gain. It's not the same working in the office in UNV headquarters, or you know, Geneva, or UNDP New York, or it's really, really different work. You do hands-on work, you work along with other staff. you can sometimes accomplish much more than staff member of that agency, and I think it's something precious.
Just on the other end, is there a top age limit for volunteers with the United Nations?
We don't have age limits. Some of the main thing is that there is a health insurance which has to be provided. So after a certain age, you have to provide health insurance, but there is no age limit. If you are 70, you can still volunteer if you're fit and healthy.
Thank you very much again, Sandra, for this insight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So just, I said I would keep myself short so people can also go back to their normal life. I just wanted to inform that cinfo also provides for services to Swiss nationals who are interested in working with the United Nations or international financial institutions. This is, for example, before applying, where we organize networking events or information events like this one here, or another one in Geneva, that Sandra just mentioned, where we actually make meetings, in-person meetings possible. There, Sandra, for example, will come also to interview certain interesting candidates. So if you have not yet applied and are interested, look at our website or go through the link that is provided in this presentation. We do provide for career advice services so that you can orient yourself where you're standing and also assess your competencies so that you can actually better see where you would be a fit with your competencies, with all your knowledge, skills that you have acquired, and the whole bag of competencies that you bring with. This is all before applying these services. We also have services while applying. So, for example, for application preparation, reviews of CVs, or for example, the P11, which is the personal history profile CV of the UN agencies. It's quite a beast to fill in, and it's not always easy to stand out through that. So we also provide advice for that, and there's also possibility for interview training and preparation. We'll also do in Geneva on 3rd of November in the afternoon application preparation workshop. So for those who are interested in applying and have a position in mind, please also participate in Geneva. We select about 15 participants who will support in developing their application. And another thing that we do, and that's actually interesting also for you, if you have applied for one of the agencies, the 3 that are online at the moment, or the 2, UNICEF and UNFPA, who have been on our last seminar, webinar about 2 months ago, please inform us about your application. We will get in contact if you have the relevant competencies, and if you fulfill the minimum criteria. We will inform the agency about the application of the Swiss national, and we also are in touch with the Swiss government, who then decides whether they're interested in supporting such an application or not. And this is also interesting in case your application doesn't go through in the end. We're in touch with the agency and ask for feedback on where you are and maybe also what was still lacking in your profile. This is a very new service that we provide. So I mentioned it before, on 3rd of November we have a networking event, an in-person event in Geneva. They are all 5 focused organizations of the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency are present in person. In the morning with panel sessions, and in the afternoon with specific discussion possibilities. And as I mentioned, Sandra and a colleague of her will be there to interview even people, and that's a top opportunity to make a dent, to make yourself actually known, so that people know what you're able to do. And any further questions? I think we can take 1 or 2, because we're at the end of our presentations. There is actually one that we have received. I would probably give it to UNDP. What is your advice as to how I can do a successful mid-career transition to the UN. My case coming from the ICRC.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that one. That's a nice challenging question to the end, because a mid-career change is always tough. And it's there's some of the basic homework that you have to do in terms of being prepared for that career change yourself. But I'll remain specific to UNDP, and if you're already working for ICRC, you are already in that international organization arena. So that already has a high relevance, and it just depends on if you're looking to switch on a very technical level, if you've got a very specific profile that you're looking for, or if it's a mid-level career change and you've been at a managerial level, then it's also about showing that your skills are transferable. And I think that notion of transferable skills has been something that's been around in the HR world, and you've probably heard it in other webinars or in other resources that you've gathered as you prepare for applications, prepare for any job change, not only a career change. But that's a very key aspect to do so. Having worked for an international or working for an international organization already, that does help set you apart, because it means you understand the complexities of working for an international organization. And that's something that you then probably want to emphasize as well, that you know what it's like to work not only in an international organization, but what it means to work in a field-based organization. So no matter if you're applying for a headquarters, a regional hub, a policy center, or a country office position, what you can do to stand out a little more from others, even though you're doing a career change, is that you appreciate what it means to work in an organization that's spread across the world and that has many different priorities in many different countries.
Thanks a lot, Georg. Anything you want to add on this, Maria?
Georg answered it. Do you hear me? Yes. I want to make sure.
Yes, yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, I think Georg covered it pretty well, but maybe one that can be explored, not necessarily, I mean, in general, for a mid-career change, see if the organization you're working for has, because we do some expert secondments as well. For various international development organizations. So there may be an agreement between your organization as well as a UN organization where for a specific project or, a research advisor or whatnot, one can be on loan from one organization to another. And there are some sort of arrangements like that, but again, it may be for specific organizations, but that's something worth exploring. But maybe something that, if you want to explore like how to try out the UN, it may be a good venue to think about.
Thanks a lot. And Sandra, do you want to say anything about mid-career changes?
Hello. I just want to say, why not UNB?
Okay. Thanks a lot. Okay. Thank you very much. So I think we're at the end of this webinar. Thank you very much to the three presenters for the time that you dedicated to this and your insight and sharing also your personal views. Thank you very much to all the listeners for your interest. As said, you will receive all the documents, the presentation and the recording in a couple of days. You will immediately after this webinar receive a survey. We will be about your satisfaction, what we could improve. We would be very happy if you could fill that in. And I hope to see many of you in Geneva, as we will also meet in person. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. All the best.